Morning everyone, thanks so much for coming in. There's so many of you, it's almost scary. No, I really appreciate it and thanks so much for the guys for putting together such a good event and the tower buildings and all. It's just so great to be here. Yeah, my name's Sean, I'm an artist and a designer. Yeah, I kind of work across a load of different roles, but I think an artist and a designer is kind of a good umbrella term for what I do day to day. Yeah, like my path kind of, you know, I get to explore lots of different mediums and different environments and experiment with different things. So, yeah, I think that particularly ties well in with today's theme, which is obviously a nomad. Like Yvonne said, you know, a nomad is kind of somebody who is always kind of moving forward and never really settling in the same place. And I think that kind of, as a creative in Dublin, I think you're a nomad whether you like it or not. I think you'll probably go through about 20 different studios before you settle on eventually. So, but no, I think, you know, being nomadic as a creative resonates with me, especially from a young age. You know, I think being nomadic as a creative is, you know, it's important to kind of let all these kind of external influences in and not necessarily let like your mediums and different things, the confines of your mediums kind of dictate what it is you do. And yeah, I think that's been something that I've kind of explored over the years, and I think that'll become quite apparent through our talk today. I aim to kind of bring you through my journey right back from, you know, becoming interested in art, and then I'm going to kind of move into, you know, early career and maybe finding my style and stuff like that. And then I think I'm going to kind of maybe finish with talking more about the Blahu mural, which is the biggest mural in Ireland. It was a massive undertaking and there was a lot involved, and very proud of the project. So I'll probably just elaborate more on that. And then at the end, if anybody wants to ask any questions or chat, you know, feel free to pull me aside afterwards if you feel more comfortable doing that. Yeah, so this is a photo my mum took of me when I was younger. Yeah, so when I was younger, both of my nanas and my mum were very artistic. I think as a young boy, embracing the artwork was, like, a lot of my early drawings were of, you know, like any other young boy, like of Spider-Man and stuff like that. But I think as I got a bit older, a lot of my drawings were of like the Liverpool crest, the lyra bird on the Liverpool crest, things like that. And I feel like that was obviously me wanting to explore art, but also being held back by what I felt I should be drawing as a young boy. And then I think it wasn't until, you know, getting a bit older, you know, my mum, who's here with us today, she was probably my biggest artistic influence growing up. She brought me everywhere basically. My mum studied photography in DIT, so through that whole time she brought me over to like the Tate Gallery in London. She brought me to exhibitions all over Dublin. She brought me to Bob Dylan. That was my first gig.
Been out by someone about that.
Yeah, and then like day gigs and Eamon Doran's and Temple Bar, and what else did she bring me to? Just tons of stuff. She brought me, like, we developed photos in a makeshift dark room in our flat. That was cool. And then, yeah, like her studio, her photography studio in DIT and stuff. So I think just being brought to all of those environments really opened me up to a whole new world of art and design and music. Many of these influences are all, you know, I could trace a lot of my current music taste and taste in art, taste of clothing, all this stuff maybe back to a lot of those things that she showed me. So, and also I just think it's pretty amazing that for, you know, someone who was, you know, looking after a child that age, to be able to do a degree and also work a job and just really open me up to that world, like, you know, just so thankful for that. And yeah, I just think it was amazing that she was able to do that, so well done. Yeah, but but yeah, it wasn't, I think, until I went to events like, you know, the Tivoli Jam up the Tivoli car park, which was ran by All City, and the Kings of Concrete, which was ran by David Smith at the time. You know, those events were, I think, quite important to me, important to everybody really. Anyone I know who's my age or older, currently either painting graffiti or painting artwork, who used to do graffiti, you know, that's generally where that seed was planted. You know, just being able to go in and meet the artists that you were looking up online every day and seeing them in the flesh and almost looking at them like a famous footballer or something like that. You know, that was really amazing. But also just to actually sit and watch people paint and learn from that. You know, I think it's so important for events like that to happen. And they don't really happen much nowadays. I mean, the Tivoli Jam is still very much happening, but it's spread out around the city. It's spread out around like laneways like this and stuff like that. It doesn't have a home. But there is an event up in Charlemont Square called the Block Party. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. Hopefully that's here to stay, because I think that's just such an important event that brings tons of people of all ages and backgrounds together, and opens them up to loads of different art as well, not just graffiti. But yeah, so moving on from that, the jams, I mean, I would have looked up to graffiti writers like Rask and Arts when I was growing up, and then there was a lot of graffiti writers who were also exploring art at the time, like Mesa and Jor, James Early. They were all really, really important to me. You know, for many reasons. I mean, I love very graffiti-looking graffiti, but I also really love when people kind of delved further and made graffiti look, I suppose, different to how it looked in the 80s. And people like Mesa and Jor and James Early were really doing that at the time. And still are in many ways. I mean, people who let the things that they were looking at outside of graffiti in and let that kind of shape the graffiti that they were making, that was always, I think, the coolest graffiti to me, and it still is. So yeah, I mean, I was kind of hooked from then on, but then I had to get good at it because I was shy. So yeah, there's lots of years of just copying stuff online, using terrible websites like Graffiti Creator. And yeah, eventually my mum put me in the graffiti classes in Aussie, which is where I met Mesa for the first time. And I think that's a funny and important thing to mention, because, you know, I was about 8 or 9 years old and I was learning how to do graffiti. And now, I don't know how many years later now, it's probably like 15, 16, 17 years later, we're like best friends, and that's true art and true graffiti and stuff. And I just think, I don't know if there are many other things where someone could end up becoming good friends with somebody through their passion for something like that, from being such a young age and ending up being friends with them when they're older. So, you know, thank you graffiti and thank you art for being able to do that. I thought that was really, really amazing. So, before I move on to talking about the things that I later painted, I think it's probably quite important to talk about graffiti for a few minutes and talk about the evolution of graffiti, because it's something that I was always quite passionate about, and I'm still quite passionate about, just in different ways. So for anyone that doesn't really know the actual timeline of graffiti and the evolution of it, so graffiti originated in the 60s in Philadelphia. A lot of people think it originated in New York, but it actually originated in Philadelphia. It started with tagging. There wasn't really a lot of style to it. It was essentially people writing their name on buses and walls and just gaining notoriety and fame in their area. Mainly it was born out of poverty, it was born out of boredom. There wasn't a lot of, I don't think it was very cool to do at the time, but it wasn't until it spread to cities like New York and stuff, maybe in the late 60s, early 70s, that it started to become stylized, and you know, train writing was introduced, and it started to evolve a bit more like that. And then, you know, by the 80s, it was officially the visual identity for hip hop. And then, you know, once it became the unofficial visual identity for hip hop, it just spread to the rest of the world, you know, through things like album covers all on MTV, you know, graffiti being in the background for music videos for Run DMC, Beastie Boys album covers, you know, there's graffiti artists designed one of their first album covers and stuff like that. So suddenly that just sweeps the rest of the world, and young kids suddenly think that graffiti is the coolest thing in the world and want to go out and do it. And then also things like, you know, Wild Style. It's a movie based on hip hop and graffiti culture. If you haven't seen it, I really recommend watching it. That's your Friday night sorted. It's brilliant, it's good fun, and it'll show you a whole world of graffiti that not many people see. But yeah, so then, you know, by the 90s, graffiti was well and truly established, and I guess it kind of only really started to truly evolve then. There was a couple of artists back in the 70s who were really taking it in different directions, but I don't think it was until around the 90s where, you know, I think artists were maybe who grew up doing graffiti were now maybe pursuing, you know, proper careers and stuff. And I think personally a lot of how graffiti shaped and evolved during that time was probably down to a lot of people reaching the age where they start to go to college and they start to let different influences in. Graffiti started to look quite three-dimensional, started to really not look like the graffiti that anybody knew. And I kind of personally think that this was down to maybe people going and studying product design, studying architecture, and starting to really make things look quite architectural and look quite different. That mainly took place in Europe, but then obviously later on that kind of started to evolve. But then that kind of brings us to like the early 2000s and 2010s. It was around that time that street art kind of came in. People like Banksy and, you know, all those heads that everybody knows all too well. It was around then that I think street art as a whole became something that people could genuinely delve into and pursue as a career. I think a lot of people who are maybe pursuing arts degrees who maybe grew up doing graffiti were now finding ways to make their work more accessible. They weren't going down the gallery route, they were just going out into the street and they were painting rooftops, painting buildings, and you know, that made this a lot more viable for artists who maybe didn't want to go down the gallery route and who could now be a lot more independent and self-sufficient. And a lot of amazing artwork was painted during that time. So it was around this time that my journey, I think, began as an artist and a graffiti artist as well. It was a really important time. Sorry. So I painted tons and tons of very graffiti-looking graffiti before I started painting things like this. I painted lots of mainly just very legible lettering and stuff like that. It was always about, you know, people seeing your name, people understanding who you were. But I think it wasn't until, you know, maybe when I was around transition year in school, which would have been around 15, 16, that's kind of when I started to explore other things outside of graffiti properly. You know, I started becoming quite interested in graphic design, especially, you know, the Bauhaus and stuff like that. And I started trying to paint things that maybe were a little bit more technical, and started exploring, you know, more interesting balances of color. And I mean, the stuff on the left here, that was me, I guess, trying to still spell my name, but trying to do things in a lot more of an expressive way. Started to kind of layer abstract shapes and composing them in a way that kind of spelled the word Atmos. That allowed me to kind of play with being super clean, which is something that I always really loved from the start. But I liked kind of playing with tons of color. And then the work on the right here, that's kind of more when I started playing with typography. So, you know, exploring things like, you know, I was really influenced by like Paul Renner's Futura posters and stuff like that. And then I loved all of Wim Krell, like that abstract typography stuff, that experimentation I loved. And I think it's quite apparent whenever I was painting this sort of thing, just dissecting and playing with graphic lettering as a whole, but still spelling my name. I could never really move away from writing my name, which is that graffiti thing coming in. So towards the end of school, I didn't really want to do anything other than paint. I was doing mixes on weekends and stuff. You know, I done murals in my school. That just said the name of my school. I was working doing, you know, shop shutters. I was doing gyms. I was doing logos on, you know, restaurant walls and stuff like that. So I was already finding ways to kind of become self-sufficient with my artwork, but in very small ways, and a lot of money was probably just going on runners and drink and nights out and stuff like that, and I wasn't really taking, you know, actually being an artist as a career very seriously at all. You know, I wasn't really sure what it was I wanted to do, but I knew whatever it was, it had to be painting in some shape or form. But whenever it came to kind of deciding whether or not I wanted to go to college, I had explored doing a PLC in graphic design, but I really wasn't sure. I applied for fine art in IDT, and I got in, and I was really happy about that. But it wasn't until I had a coffee with my art teacher, I just reached out to her. We had a really, really good relationship, and I gave her a shout, and we met up and had a coffee, and I kind of just let her know where I was at, where I was, you know, I was painting, doing all these kind of random jobs and mixers, and you know, I just really wasn't sure if studying fine art was for me. And she done this really interesting method, and I don't know, it just always sticks with me. She took like salt and pepper, which at the table we were sitting at, and she poured it all out on the table, and she got an envelope and she started kind of doing it all out, and she was like, this is you here, this is where you're going. And then she was kind of going, so you're painting at the moment, you're spending all your time painting, you've tons of paint in your house, you know, you're trying to find all these spaces to go out and paint all this time, you're surrounding yourself with people in graffiti, you're wanting to explore all these things. And she was like, what is it about studying in a college, studying fine art, that interests you? And I couldn't really pinpoint that. I kind of felt it's just this natural progression. If you're into art, maybe you should go and do this. And I kind of came to the conclusion that maybe that isn't what I should do. And she advised me to, if you can, save up a bit of money and try and get yourself a studio and just start painting what you're painting outside, indoors, and just really delve into all the different interests that I had. So yeah, I reached out to a random person online who said they had a studio available, and it was actually in East Wall, which is where me and my mum were living. So it was convenient. It was in Austria Road in an industrial estate. It looked tiny. It was terrible, but it was really cheap. And they said they'd give me the first month for free. So I was like, yeah, grand, sorted. So I moved in there, and I think I was there for about 2 years. So, or maybe it was about a year and a half. But I was working at a bar to kind of fund that. So wasn't really getting a lot of painting done. It also, conveniently, the East Wall Rave was in the same building. So a lot of the time I went back there to paint, there wasn't much painting being done. But the painting that I did do was fun. It was terrible, but I do think that period was a lot better for me at that time than going to college, because what it did was it opened me up to, I suppose, feeling bad about not going there, paying rent for a space that I'm at times not using, and starting to go, right, you know what, if I'm going to do this, right, I really need to start doing this properly. Also, it made me realize, you know, right, this isn't going to work. You know, storage, how much paint do I need? Right, I need a bigger space. Light, I was in essentially a cloakroom, so there was no natural light in the building. So you know, it helped me kind of discover all these things naturally. And then it wasn't until I was actually on a night out, and a friend of mine I was chatting to, and he had kind of heard that I'd been working. He'd seen a couple of paintings that I'd been doing over the past couple of years, and he heard that I was in that studio, and he heard that I definitely had no idea what I was doing or where I was going. So he reached out to me, and he said if I wanted to come work with him in his new company, which at the time was called Rabbit Hole Promotions, but it later became Subset. I don't know if many people know Subset, but a lot of murals were painted around Dublin a couple of years ago, and Subset was responsible for a lot of them. So yeah, I joined Subset when I was quite young. My initial role was, you know, priming walls. I was a bit of a paint monkey for the first year or so. Yeah, priming walls for larger productions, and then I got to explore using some of my like very basic graphic design skills, doing, you know, all of our proposal documents for client projects and stuff like that. And then, you know, as time went on, my responsibilities grew, as did my skills, and yeah, I started kind of managing large productions by myself, and then I started designing them for clients and stuff like that. So it was over this time that I think my real, you know, my development as, I suppose, a muralist happened, and I started to kind of leave doing graffiti aside for a while. I do it on weekends and stuff like that, but yeah, it was a really formative few years. I spent a lot of time, you know, kind of shadowing the lads, which were very good at what they were doing. And yeah, it also opened me up to, you know, learning how to paint things that were outside of my comfort zone. I think we can all fall into this this habit of kind of painting what we're used to, and it can feel quite vulnerable and daunting to try and move out of that. And painting with a company that we were all painting anonymously, that anonymity kind of really helped with that exploration, because you're exploring without feeling like a certain style is tied to you and your name and your brand if you're a company. So that was really enjoyable. And also mixing public art with commercial art at times was quite difficult, but in many ways, in hindsight, was probably one of the most valuable skills I ever learned, because at times you're applying different types of art to different types of client projects. So, for example, I might be doing portraiture for a project, and then the next day I might be doing block color, and I might be playing with abstract shapes and forms and stuff like that. So, it was quite. I got to experiment with lots of different things, and that was only good for expanding my skill set and moving forward as an artist. So these would have been a lot of murals that I kind of worked on. For example, like the David Attenborough mural, which is just up off South Circular Road. I would have managed that one and painted a lot of it. Now, we painted a lot of our works collaboratively, so about 5 of us would have painted that, which for years was actually really enjoyable. Just learning the flow of painting, not just by yourself, but with other people, learning how certain people work, but also from a project management perspective. I think it's important to point this out now, that like a lot of the time when you are working on these large scale productions, some people might tackle them by themselves, but many people won't. And I think it's important to know how to plan a project and who to appoint to certain roles on a project to, one, get it over the line on time, but also get it over the line safely, and also get it over the line to a certain standard. If some people are more comfortable painting a certain thing, it's important to make sure that they're looking after that part and you're looking after what you're comfortable painting as well. But yeah, over the years then, we would have worked on multiple projects, and then I guess things kind of changed for me. I spent a lot of time working on a lot of commercial projects, which is very different from when I grew up painting graffiti. You would have worked on projects for, like, for example, this would have been for when the Wu-Tang Clan came over and when Rolling Stones came over. All amazing projects to work on, but all very demanding of your creative energy. And at the same time, like, we were working collectively, but at the same time, you are an independent artist, especially in the evenings and on weekends. And when you're drained creatively, I think I started to experience that kind of creative burnout, and also kind of losing sight of maybe the path that you were once on. And the thing that I thought was me set up for good, this is great, I'm gonna paint, this is me sorted, it really wasn't. And I think that's a really important part of my journey, was kind of leaning, kind of pushing against something that I thought was me sorted. I kind of started realizing, there's other things I wanted to explore, there's other things I wanted to paint, and I kind of thought maybe this isn't working for me anymore. So I started painting. I started going back to kind of explore my own work, and I decided to leave Subset, and I started working for myself, which was quite daunting at the start, but I just kind of wanted to make sure that if I was going to do this, I was going to do this right. So I swore to myself that I wouldn't get a day job. So throughout Subset, I was also doing the odd shift in a bar and trying to just get extra money on the side. But I was like, right, if I'm gonna go do my solo career, I'm gonna make sure that there's no distractions, there's nothing else kind of keeping me from doing my work. But obviously that comes with a lot of stress, because projects aren't always aren't always there. So it was daunting, but I kind of used that as a bit of a motivator. I made sure that if there was nothing coming in, that I was just painting somewhere. I might have been doing graffiti, I might have been experimenting with murals, I might have been trying to paint studio work in a space that I could work in. But I spent maybe a year or so doing this, and then James Early had reached out to me, and he gave me my first client project as Sean Atmos. At the time, I wasn't actually even labeling myself as Sean Atmos. I didn't actually really know what to be doing. I didn't know whether I wanted to continue working anonymously. I didn't know if I wanted to actually put a face to the work that I was doing. I really didn't know what I wanted to do at all, but I knew that, like, from the start, that whatever I had to do, I had to be painting. So yeah, James Early had reached out, and I'm so grateful for him giving me my first opportunity to do what I wanted to do. At the time, I was experimenting with typography, so I got to kind of evolve that style a lot. And then, that project really set me up this time around. The money that I got from that didn't go on runners and nights out. It went purely on materials and rent, and something that could really keep moving me forward. So that was great. And then it wasn't until maybe, I think it was 2021, when Mesa reached out to me and he offered me a place on a residency program with his gallery Atelier Now. And this was really important to me because I got to explore the style that I was exploring at the time, but it was very, I was kind of intermittently exploring it over the years, but now I got to really delve in, full freedom. I had a space, I didn't have to worry about the rent. So any projects I was doing at the time, I could just spend money on materials, put a rent on my flat, and I had absolutely no stress. So, I'm forever grateful for being offered that place, because I think it was such a pivotal time when I didn't really know what direction I was going, because it gave me that space to really figure out, okay, this is what I want to paint. And it also just made me quite comfortable with the stuff I was painting and how I was painting as well. It was in the Mart Studios up in Harold's Cross, which also opened me up to just a whole creative network of people, loads of people working with like sculpture and print and stuff like that as well. So just, up to that point, I was working quite independently after Subset. Suddenly now I was having coffees with lots of different artists of different ages and different backgrounds, and you kind of suddenly feel part of something again, which was really, really good, even just from my creative morale as well. So yeah, this would have been the type of work that I was working on when I was in the residency, exploring lots of really colourful stuff, which I then later applied to a lot of the murals that I painted. So I spent maybe a year or two exploring that style of work. I was entering myself into every group show that I could find. I was selling enough work to kind of keep me going. But it wasn't until maybe a year or so later that a gallery in Montreal reached out to me called Station 16. And I had sent them a consignment of a couple of paintings, which sold straight away, which was great. And off the back of that, they decided to include me in their booth at Art Basel in Miami, which was huge for me because you're on the world stage with some of the best artists in the world. So I really wanted to make sure that whatever I was sending over was very me. So I was really, really happy with these two pieces that I made. I'm sure if anyone knows Paul Renner, you'll probably see that influence of those early Futura posters in this work. I can never really leave that influence behind. I love that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was really, really happy with these works. So I actually ended up doing 2 Art Basels with the guys. The first year were these 2 pieces, and the second year I done more sculptural works where I started sending a lot of my shapes through a plotter where the shapes would be digitally cut with wood, and then I would assemble them together. So yeah, I started exploring more sculptural stuff. Mainly for me, I love that kind of hard edge painting, that clean lines, and I wanted to try and explore how to do that in a non-painterly way. So yeah, this was a really cool photo that was sent to me of my work next to Banksy's work over at Art Basel in Miami. It was really important to me to see a photo like that, especially, suddenly, if you look at the timeline there, I was kind of trying to find my feet. Suddenly I'm around this lovely creative community and I'm starting to find my style. So to get a photo like this was such a massive motivator, just in terms of actually wanting to kind of, I suppose, explore and getting my work out there on a larger scale, and also maybe exploring bigger opportunities, like for example murals and stuff like that by myself. At the time I wasn't doing a whole lot of murals. They were quite hard to come by, also quite hard to plan, and also quite expensive. So this was a huge motivator for me in terms of moving forward. This show came about not long after that. So this was a show in Outset Gallery in Galway. So the concept of the show was 4 professional muralists were invited to create work in the gallery, but also in response to the work that they may make as muralists outside. So a couple of us decided to actually paint the walls of the gallery and then exhibit our work on top of that. which made for a really interesting show, and it gave me lots of ideas moving forward. Up to that point, I had only done group shows, but it was maybe a year or two later that I was offered my first solo show by Atelier Now. So I decided, it was at this point that I was actually going through a kind of change mentally outside of my work. You know, I was kind of exploring, giving up alcohol. I'd gotten really into running like everyone at the moment. But yeah, I just naturally, it was kind of changing as a young adult, and I started to kind of respond to that with the work I was making. I was experimenting with abstract type, but for this show I decided to maybe focus on maybe using mantras that I kind of spoke to myself at the time to kind of move forward and motivate myself. So a lot of the work on the show was kind of directly influenced by what was going on with me at the time. So for the launch night, we had obviously a launch night where everybody joined us, but we also did on a Saturday morning where we hosted a talk where I chatted to Irish-based runner who had ran 30 marathons in 30 days for charity, and he done it after going through a really rough patch mentally. So I thought that was a really interesting way of bringing people into the gallery who maybe felt more comfortable coming in on a Saturday morning, and I also opened them up to an influence of mine or somebody that I found really inspirational at the time. And I thought that kind of spoke quite well to the show that I had done. This show that came not long after that as well was massive for me because I got to explore another different medium. So this show was in Hang Tough Contemporary with Cadogan rug makers. So the guys invited a bunch of us to create works that would then be hand tufted into rugs. Amazing artists like Domino Whisker and Sean Scully and Dorothy Cross, Macer, Colin McCatlioch, all these amazing artists got to explore this medium, and it was just an amazing show with a bunch of really amazing people. I think it was a kind of highlight so far. So it wasn't until I started doing a lot of these shows that I started getting more larger commercial works as a muralist. This was a project that I done for H&M. So the guys had reached out to me to do, initially we were going to do a street sculpture, but the turnaround for planning permission didn't provide. So we actually decided to, we were going to do like an in-store painting, and then we hosted an artist talk as well. And then we also released a screen print, which was available to members, and also we released a jumper, which was really cool. So within that one project, we got to explore so many different avenues and so many different creative outputs. And when I arrived on the day to do the talk, I discovered that the whole building had been covered in this, which I didn't know was going to happen. So that was deadly. I was really happy with that. So this project was one I done by myself. This was a couple of years ago for Boland's Mills. The writing on the side of Boland's Mills was obviously very iconic. The building, the old abandoned building, was obviously covered in graffiti. So for me, it was quite iconic. So yeah, the guys wanted me to kind of give my interpretation of the writing on the side of Boland's Flour Mills using my typographic style, which I was then becoming fairly known for. So yeah, it was really great to create that mural. At the time, it was huge for me, and from then on, I think that style for me became something that clients a lot of the time were requesting. Up to that point, I really had to steer the client in the direction of the things that I wanted to paint, but it wasn't until I painted this mural that people generally were like, what is it you want to do? Let's do it. So that was a really important time for me. Another client project that came after that was for Kildare Village. I had worked with the guys before, but it wasn't until this piece, it was the first mural that I started exploring independently, where I was creating work without typography. So on the lead up to this, I had a year where I wasn't actually doing a whole lot of murals. I'd done one or two, but I was mainly in the studio and I was mainly experimenting with non-typographic work. So yeah, that was a really great moment for me because I got to finally explore this, and I love working with the architectural features of the building. For me, architecture would be a massive influence on my work. So exploring the kind of shapes and forms, using curves to kind of contrast some of the harsh horizontal and vertical lines of a building things like that were really fun. So yeah, I was really happy with that mural. So that was kind of I suppose my journey up till maybe about a year ago. And the next project that I'm going to tell you about was the Blahu mural down at Boland's Mills. So I was one of 5 artists approached to pitch for creating this project. So 4 other artists were asked to create a concept for this space here. So yeah, the project was going to be part of a 150-year regeneration project of the whole Boland's Mills site. So for that reason, I decided to explore all of the mechanical features that were in the old Boland's flour mills. And then I decided to try and kind of, I suppose, contrast that and see the relationship between those mechanical industrial elements with more natural, colourful elements, which would have been found down at the Irishtown Nature Park nearby. So I wanted to try and connect some of the industrial features of the area to some of the natural features in the area. So I then wanted to explore the possibility of utilising AR technology. So for people that don't know, that's augmented reality. Things like, for example, like Snapchat face filters and stuff like that. So I wanted to try and use that technology to try and connect the artwork with different audiences, particularly people with additional needs. So, you know, the wall is absolutely massive, and it's obviously at Boland's Flour Mill. So for me, like coming from just over the Liffey in East Wall, painting a piece in my home city of this scale was a huge, huge moment for me. I think it would be huge for any artist in Dublin to be offered this space. So, you know, I really put a lot of work into the proposal and the plan, and I really wanted to think about who I wanted this mural to be for. You know, it is close to home, but it's not my area, so it was important to me about what I paint. You know, it was important to me that the community felt that the artist chosen to paint this really cared about what was going up, but also really cared about what they wanted painted as well. So to do this, I hosted a bunch of in-person discussions with loads of community members, local business owners. Invited a local community group called NIRP, which is a neurodiverse, or a group for parents of neurodiverse children, a support group. And I also invited As I Am, which are Ireland's autism charity. So for this, I done this so that I could ask people, you know, what is it you guys want to get out of this? This mural is going to be in your area for the next 10 years, so it was important to me that we done it right. So during these discussions, I received a bunch of really insightful feedback from the community members, and I think from these discussions, you know, I was able to kind of shape a bunch of key factors that would then help me in designing the piece. So for example, like the composition of the piece. So from different vantage points, so from here up, you can see that from most of like Ringsend, all the cottages, all of the residential parts of the area, you could see that part. So I wanted to make sure that people, whenever they left their houses, could only see earthy tones. I didn't want them to see really vibrant colours, because I found that was quite invasive on just people getting up, going to work, going about their day. And then also like using really vibrant tones and stuff, I thought was quite intense, but I thought it was also quite like stimulating and fun. So I thought that might be more suited to people who are working nearby, so the more office area, the laneway. So for me, you know, the composition of the piece was quite important. The colour balance, so balancing the base of the neutral tones with warm tones and earthy tones for me was important, but also I received really interesting feedback from the guys in terms of you know, for neurodiverse viewers, you know, balancing things like neutral tones, earthy tones, warm tones. You know, the use of like high contrast color combinations can be quite overstimulating for some viewers. Really, really bright reds and stuff can quite anger certain viewers as well. So that was really, really valuable information in also deciding what colors to use for the piece. I also wanted to use some of the colors in the area, which I thought would be quite helpful for letting the mural sit into its environment. So for example, the kind of terracotta color on the right of the wall and the base, or the second layer, the teal color that you can see throughout the piece, a lot of that teal color is actually used to clad some of the roofs of the building on the street, and then the terracotta color was the clad on some of the office buildings nearby. So I wanted the mural to stand out, but I also wanted it to speak to its environment and not impose on its environment either. There's some really amazing architectural structures around there, so I kind of wanted the mural to kind of find its little home and not stand out or be too jarring. But then also the logistics of painting the piece also really heavily dictated the design. You know, painting a piece on this scale, like the timeline, you know, the complexity of the design will dictate the timeline of the piece. You know, the method of installation, like, are we going to paint this on a scaffold structure? Are we going to paint it on a moop, which is a cherry picker? You know, all these different things dictate how complex that design is going to be. If you're open a basket on a moop or a cherry picker, you know, there might only be 1 or 2 people able to fit in that basket. You might only be able to take up certain amounts of materials. It might be unsafe to take up too many materials. It might be unsafe to use a roller pole and hitting it off things can fall off. You know, there's all these different factors that you have to take into consideration when approaching designing a piece of this scale. And then obviously the main thing was obviously the audience. So there's children, there's elderly people, there's neurodiverse people, there's neurotypical people, there's, you know, viewers with hearing and vision impairments. So all these things were things I wanted to explore in order to make the piece accessible. So I kind of explored doing this by using AR technology. So after finalising the design, I spent about 2 months building the plan application. So there was a bunch of key factors that I kind of discovered during that time after we all had finalised on the design. So the timeline of the installation. So if we were to create a piece that took over 30 days, it would essentially be classified as a building site. So there was different site requirements involved for that and a lot of different things that I had to then learn in order to move forward with the project. So the installation method, so we decided to go with scaffolding using a cherry picker in an alleyway like that. At that height, the scaffolding structure ended up being 17 stories, so it was far too windy down there, and also using things like that. The alarm on the lift would have been quite annoying for residents over a month period, far too dangerous in terms of wind. So it's a bunch of different factors, a bunch of different health and safety things to kind of be mindful of. And then obviously the installation timeline. So for example, you know, the scaffold build, the dismantling of the scaffold, how long it's going to take us to actually paint the artwork. All these different factors were taken into consideration when approaching the planning application. You know, the wall preparation. So it wasn't just jumping up there and painting the wall. There was mold to be removed. Oh, sorry, it's on a different slide. So there was a lot of mold to be removed from the wall. The wall was this kind of porous, chalky surface, so we had to use stabilising solution as well. Then we obviously had to use our base coat, and then we had to paint the piece. So in total, by the end of it, we painted the wall about 5 times. So yeah, it's quite tedious. But yeah, and then also the maintenance of the wall. So, you know, it wasn't just about putting this lovely colourful mural up. It was about how we're going to make sure that this lovely mural is going to look great for many years to come. So, you know, planning how that is, putting all that work into preparing the surface to make sure that this piece looks clean for at least 5 to 10 years, but then also working into the overall budget a maintenance fee. So, you know, who's going to fund actually keeping this mural looking great? You know, carrying out annual inspections to make sure that the piece is in good condition, chatting with architects about installing bird spikes on the top of the wall to make sure that bird droppings, that kind of thing. Yeah, like loads of different things went into making sure that this piece was done correctly. So once we received planning permission, we had the engineer design the scaffold structure. For like safe access and egress, we had a walkway tunnel designed into the structure. That kind of meant that we could get up there and paint this mural over a month and get back down and remove the whole thing, but completely undisturbing any tenants in the building. So about 4,500 people passed through the walkway underneath the piece every day. So we had to make sure that nobody was disturbed, people could get to work safely. We had delivery drivers delivering pallets of paper and food and stuff like that every day. So we had to make sure that the walkway was 1.5 meters in width. We also had to make sure that no fire escapes were obstructed for the duration of the project. So it was quite a different task for me managing this type of thing. So we spent about a year managing this in the background before we could actually put paint on the wall. So it was a very interesting process. I think tackling any smaller mural now will be a walk in the park after this one. But yeah, so because we had to obviously be mindful of these different obstacles, we began the scaffold build on a Saturday and Sunday morning in the pissing rain. There was a team of about 25 people putting the scaffold structure together, which was mad. I thought there was going to be about 10 of us. So vans of people kept arriving, and it was just very, very new for me, but it was very exciting as well, seeing the scaffold structure go up, that kind of everything finally coming to the point where you're going to paint the piece. The scaffold structure went up in about 2 weeks, and following mural completion, the scaffold was dismantled in about 2 weeks as well. So that took about 4 weeks in total, about a month. So this is a photo of me with a member of NARP and As I Am when the mural was finished. This was such a brilliant moment for me because I got to actually finally show the mural to the people that done such an important role in actually helping the mural come to life. It was a really great moment. So a couple of facts about the mural in completion. So the mural is 724 meters squared in total, which is making it the largest mural ever painted in Ireland. The previous largest mural was about 450 meters squared, so I think we done well there. We almost doubled it. The piece took 16 days to paint over 3 work weeks. We had a team of 3 people paint it. We worked from the bottom, we worked up to the top, we moved to the left, we worked back down, and then we moved to the left again, and we worked back up. So we worked in sections of about 8 by 12 meters. I broke it down into 724 meter squared boxes. And then I designed onto that, and then so whenever we were up on the scaffolding, everybody each morning was sent a screenshot of the design in relation to where they're at. Everything was labelled, so it meant that we could keep plowing through. We didn't have to give direction. Everybody knew where they were going to be painting. I could be up on the 16th floor of the scaffold, somebody could be on the 15th floor, somebody could be on the first floor. Everybody knew what they were doing. Nobody really had to ask too many questions. So it was great to get the mural painted in the end. It was a bit of a relief to get the scaffold off site and get it open to everyone. But then the next phase, which was finalising the augmented reality. So I approached a team called Imbazar, who are actually based in the building here. They're an Irish startup specialising in digital storytelling. They're absolutely amazing at what they do, and they're extremely passionate about what they do, which really helps. So I wanted to make sure that we didn't just create one experience. So we actually ended up developing 2 experiences. We created one that was a grounding, calming experience, and then we created one which was a more stimulating, energetic experience. We done this because certain viewers would require a more calming experience in order to feel grounded, and some people would actually require a more stimulating experience. For people with vision and hearing impairments, I wanted to make sure that people could access a lovely motion, but I also wanted to make sure that people who maybe couldn't access the piece visually could also access the piece from a soundscape perspective. So we had somebody compose 2 pieces of music. We had somebody compose an energetic piece of music for the energetic experience, and we had somebody compose a more calming ambient experience for the more grounding experience. And we also wanted to make sure that people who maybe couldn't see the piece could feel the piece. So we made sure we explored the materials that I used in the piece. So for example, I made the piece with leaves. The big spiral shape is actually the flower shoot that was in the original building. So all the flower in the building would have came down this big spiral shape. So I used the base of the piece as the flower shoot. So we explored what would it be like for flower sounding coming down that chute. We explored what leaves would sound like when they're moving in the wind. We explored what leaves would sound like when they crumble. The guys explored what the mechanical structures would sound like. So when you're in this experience, you can hear, what like steel would sound like when it hits against concrete. You can hear, all these lovely ambient sounds as well, leaves blowing in the wind, all that kind of thing, which makes the artwork a fully sensory piece of public art. I was really, really proud of getting this piece together. And I think, using things like AR technology is a great way of kind of connecting the artwork to different members of the public on a deeper level. So yeah, I was really, really happy with that. Here are some more pictures of the mural in terms of size and its environment. So you can kind of see some of these terracotta and teal colours used throughout the area. Yeah. And if you want to access the piece, you can scan the QR code down at the wall. It's at Boland's Mills, it's at Barrow Street in Grand Canal Dock. If you scan the QR code, it'll bring you to the app. If you go into the app, you can put headphones in, you can select whatever experience you want, and you can hold your phone up. When you hold your phone up, all the forms in the piece will start coming to life. They'll start moving around. You can move your phone all around the area. All the different shapes will start bouncing against buildings. You can start exploring what all the leaves will feel like blowing around you, all that kind of thing. So it's really cool. And yeah, it'd be great if people gave it a bash. That's me, guys. Thanks so much for coming. Hope you enjoyed it.